guys. So this week you're going to have a pleasure of listening to Dr. Carmine Felice, who basically worked with so many different professionals in a variety of fields, including NHL, NFL, obviously tennis. When I was working for Tennis Canada a couple of years back, he was in charge of all sports science department at Tennis Canada, and also taking care of our female tennis pros like Carol Zhao and Bianca Andreescu. I hope you really enjoy this one because Carmine has a lot of interesting things to say. So I cannot help but notice just right away the tats.
Yeah, man.
They pop. So what's
a lot of tats, dude.
So what's the deal with the tats?
Yeah, like I've always wanted them since I was probably in my early 20s, but was never like committed enough to do it. So then all of a sudden I think I turned like early 30s and was just like, all right, it's time. I kind of had the visions of what I wanted for about a year, and then contacted a guy who was going to come to Toronto at the show. Yeah, and he was here for a week, and yeah, did my whole entire left arm, 2 days on, 2 days off, 2 days on.
That's amazing, because usually there's bigger time between the sessions.
Yeah, it was hilarious. Like I showed up the first day and it was at the show, and he says, you're the guy with the sleeve. I said, yeah, because I was talking to his wife, who's the his assistant. Yeah, I said, yeah, that's me. And he says, you gonna be able to handle it? I said, yeah, why not? He said, well, like, it usually takes a year to get a sleeve. I said, yeah, but like my personality's not that. My personality's just like kind of
move in, let's get going. Yeah.
She said, I don't think you're gonna be able to handle it. So we're gonna just do one piece at a time, and then we'll kind of go from there. And if you ever want to like tap. So it was funny because the next day was a Sunday, and I showed up to the show late because I had a meeting and all this stuff. And I texted him, but he never got it. So I show up, and one of the other tattoo artists came and gave me this big hug and like started to lift me up. And I was like, dude, what the fuck, right? And he's just like, you made me so much money because like all the tattoo artists thought that you were gonna bail, because like it was about 4 9-hour sessions. So we did I think about 4 2 9 2 10s, and then 2 days off, and then two 9s and 2 10s again. So, and then this is about 2 years old. Yeah, so
nice. Any plans to expand?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So what are you planning?
I think next might be a hand piece. I think that might be the next. I don't know if I'm going to get this completely done yet. And then, to be honest with you, the show just came by. I like the show because the artists are kind of like from like all over the place.
That's right.
And there's less of a wait time. Mm-hmm. So I almost pulled the trigger on getting my back done in one shot.
No way.
But decided not to. So yeah.
But at some point, if you're having these thoughts, I mean, at some point, I know for myself, I did my ankle like band that you noticed. It's a Polynesian theme. Right. Which reflects my values and stuff. But I went to Miami to do this, and
cool.
It took me half a year on the waiting list. Yeah. And it's not the longest waiting list. Yeah. I'm contacting the artists, and some people get back to me. They say like, well, it's like we're looking at, if I'm booking in March, we're looking at January 2019. And I'm like, and these guys are top like price. I'm like, what the?
It's crazy. Yeah. Like there's one guy, Carlos, I forget his last name, in LA, and he was the original guy I had kind of planned on it. And the wait year was close to 2 years, Carlos Torres. And it was like a 2-year wait list. So it was just like, I didn't want to wait. And then this guy came up from Finland who he was just like really young. He had only been tattooing for 2 years, and he was actually in advertising beforehand. No. And his wife said, time to make some money. And so he started to tattoo, and I saw his work and was just like, for my sleeve, and was just like instantly drawn. And then when I needed this, she wasn't coming back, so I started to look into it and found this girl named Christina Culler, and she's based up Norway, but she was going to be in Toronto for like 2 weeks. Yeah. So had the vision of kind of like the rose and the forsythias, and then just kind of put it together, and she banged it out pretty clean. So it was good. So now I was supposed to actually get my elbow done and a couple other pieces. Yeah. But it didn't work out when she was here, actually, because she's here every year.
Okay. So she comes for the convention?
She comes for the convention, and she stays for about another week or two. So, it ends up working out pretty well. But, yeah, they're addicting. So
it is addicting. I know, like, based on my experience. I'm getting another 2 in like 6 days.
Oh, nice, man. Yeah. Well,
I'm excited. I'm getting a hawk.
Cool.
A chest, shoulder, and I'm getting a little bit of a sun.
right on.
Here, and no, it's cool. I still want to maintain, when I'm on the court, it's like no visible, nobody knows it, but it's there, and I know it's there, and it's empowering. It's weird, but it's empowering. I like it.
Yeah, like my left arm, like I got it like up on the sleeve, so you can wear a watch, and then like if I wear a shirt, nobody can see it. And it's really interesting because like I show up, and I still like I'm a chiropractor, so I still like do that stuff. So I show up to work. You see me one week, and then all of a sudden I show up the next week. I have my arms completely asleep. Yeah, it's completely different. But I still can cover it. Now I think it's a little bit easier for me. I'm a little more established. I'm a little bit older. So I'm like, all right, so I can cover it, but I think now I'm gonna go one visible on my hand and see how like it takes. I would never go on my throat or anything like that.
Well, at least not.
No.
But I mean, I think the society is more open to tattoos right now, and they're kind of like, whatever. They take it like as an accessory more than it's like before it was a taboo. Like it was like, 100%. Whoa, like he's probably like a druggie, or like now it's just like became a fashion. Yeah, which is cool.
And I think certain people like it's funny because I think. And initially I thought, well, maybe the older like pops won't like it and all that stuff. And the number of times I get stopped, like I still remember when I initially just got done. Yeah. I went to the convenience store and just kind of went to go grab some stuff. And this is an older gentleman who was like probably in his 70s. And he's just like stopped me. He's just like, I need to see the owl. And so I need to see the arm, and so he kind of stopped me aside, and the vast majority of people who like will stop me and grab me are like usually like in their 60s and 70s. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that people are open for that kind of stuff, for sure. So the t-shirt you're wearing, it's the place that you created. It's the Performance Lab. Yep. I was fascinated because you're working very close with Tennis Canada and all the athletes, the juniors, the pros that Tennis Canada is working with. I was fascinated because we did like a project together on the 3D scan. Yep. By the amount of data that can come out of short session, like per athlete. I mean, of course it takes time, but I mean just
for sure.
Like it takes an athlete like a 15 minutes.
We can usually like do a tennis athlete in about 15 minutes. I mean, we get hired by some teams like and where we get a lot of like 7 minutes. Mm-hmm. So if we're dialed in, we can bang it out pretty well.
Can you explain for people who are listening just what is it that you do, because they're not aware of that stuff, and I want more people to know about it because I think it's like mind-blowing. And what is it that you do like to analyze, and what kind of data you can pull from that assessment?
So I started off as a therapist, as a pure chiropractic like therapist who never was really like a bone popper, but more of just kind of more on the rehab side of things. And I was living in California at the time, and I always was always intrigued by more of a quantifiable approach to kind of like analysis. And like we get taught in school about like orthopedic tests, and when you kind of really break them down, they don't really work that well, and you really can't tell until you get into like the MRIs and all that stuff. So I got fascinated by the world of like diagnostics, and then I was watching it, and I was trying to figure it out, and I was just like, man, I live in California. There's so much tech. Silicon Valley's like just a couple hours away. I'm like, what's going on? Like we need to be able to figure something out. And then I was watching this TV show, and it was back in I think 2005, 2006, where it was getting close to the Olympic Games, and there was a U.S. Olympic weightlifter who was coming off of a big back injury, and he was using something like that in a science laboratory. He went to university to figure out how he can maximize his potential, and it was 3D analysis. So I thought, that's it. Whatever that is, I want it. And so I started down the path of sports science, and then it's kind of led me to work at a couple sports science centers, and then led me to Toronto, which is home. And we kind of start to kind of I started to kind of develop this place, and I kind of had an envision where I wanted to be able to recreate any sport, any motion within our lab, but not like a lab like a science geeky lab that you would think of at a university. More of like something like a playground, where we can have turf, and we can have we had fake ice at one point, where we can kind of recreate and just challenge athletes and be able to kind of capture them in their own element at maximum speed, at maximum velocity. So think of like a hockey player at maximum like flight, skating and cutting and shooting, and then be able to, because for us as like therapists and as trainers, to be able to kind of like test somebody in the gym and where they're working at like low speeds, and they're working kind of like just lifting or moving or squatting, it really doesn't capture what they're really going through.
That's right.
So think about a tennis player who's just like serving at maximum capacity, and they're just like hammering it out. It's very different than if you get somebody to say like squat, lunge, step over this piece of wood, step back over it, and then try to like extract information to say like, if I extract this information, it's going to make you a better server.
That's right.
So the thought is how do we get something to be able to kind of like capture what the true essence is at their top speed, at their like when they're really going, because the nervous system works at a very completely different level at that point. So we went all in. So went and got like it was called 3D motion capture, which it's kind of the same technology used to make video games. So same thing to make like FIFA or NHL, like 2019. We used the same thing. Actually, we made a video game for a company a couple years ago. No way. Yeah, we got hired to do a video game. So we did all the capturing, and then we gave them all the data.
Okay.
And so
and they just rendered the characters over the material. They go, oh, nice. That's so cool.
So it was fun for us because we still got to see a bit of a different application for it. But for us, what we do is we set up the same technology as we put people in through suits, and then kind of dot them up with for us right now we're using about a 41 dot system.
Yeah.
And then they get put on, and all the dots are reflective. So as long as the cameras can pick up, 2 cameras can pick up the reflection, then it gets picked up, and an avatar is created. And from the avatar, we analyze the avatar, so we can pick up like anything from joint velocities, joint angles, the positions they're in, how fast they're moving, the timing, you name it, we can grab it.
Yeah, I remember when we were going through each and every kid that we had in the program, it's like, okay, watch out for this girl's hip, watch out for this guy's shoulder, he's gonna get injured if this is not treated. It's like you can prevent so many injuries by knowing ahead what's the athlete, what kind of path does the athlete have. 100%. That's fascinating.
So we kind of marry the 3D, and then I've done a lot of work with force plates, which is just like a really sensitive scale where we can measure forces in all direction. And I was fortunate the 2 guys I mentored with in California are kind of like the people who did most of the background work on it. So we're able to extract a lot of data that the normal facilities can't, just because we just know what to look for and how to do it. And then on top of that, we spent the last, I've been out for a while now, looking at orthopedic tests and algorithm testing, and then we've created algorithms internally that we know when we're looking at like specific movements what we can extract and then pull. And I think so it's myself, and I kind of like direct the lab, but I have a person who's like my right hand, and she's awesome, and Kate's my lead biomechanist, and I think between the 2 of us together, we do a great job of being able to, because anyway, everybody always says, well, I can go buy the equipment and I can do it myself, and it's like, that's great, but where the true essence is being able to translate the numbers that we get, because we get millions of data points, and be able to translate that to say like, this is what's going to happen, this kid's going to hurt XYZ, or this is how we make this hockey player skate 10% faster. It's been fun. Like, I love what I do, and it's good. It's not a boring day at all for me.
No, for sure. And you're making such a big impact on that athlete's life, because you're, just like you're saying, by you translating that data into valuable information, you're basically improving that 1% that some of the pros are fighting for, because at that level, it's not just about technique. It's like, okay, so what can we do, that makes me maybe jump 10 spots in ranking. Maybe it's gonna make me like 1% faster, and it's just at that level there's not that many things that you can do better, because they're already like, nutrition is up there. The fitness level has gone incredibly like better in the last couple of 10 years. So the sports science is where it's really at right now, and a lot of athletes are taking advantage of it. That's for sure. Yeah,
it's blowing up. Like, the industry is definitely blowing up. I was fortunate. I got into it really early. My mentor was awesome when it comes to the sports science side. He was a Harvard graduate who decided to forego medicine and take up sports science stuff. So I picked up a lot from him. And then I think for me personally, it was just something that I kind of just like always gravitated towards. And I think now it's been fun to kind of see the rise. And you're absolutely right. Like, sports has come to a point where at that elite level, it's really like the 1% difference, and any competitive advantage you can have, why not take it? So if you're gonna be able to get 1% faster or 1% advantage, you take it. And at the lower levels, like with the kids and with like the juniors and the kids growing up, I think it's even more of an advantage because you can kind of like prevent injuries, and you can kind of take kids who potentially get injured and you fall off the face of the map.
That's right.
And be able to keep them in the game and keep them in the game a little bit longer. And it's not, I mean, the sports science world, if we kind of look at it and kind of see its development, like it's been used in Europe and the English Premier League and all that stuff for years. North America is just behind. I think Canada, unfortunately, is behind. And when I kind of had this vision of what I wanted the place to look like and where I wanted it to be, I was really stuck. I was stuck between opening up in like Manhattan Beach, California, which is kind of like probably my favorite place on earth. And in Toronto. And I was on a flight, and I landed, and I kind of was setting up what I was going to do in Toronto, and it was like, I'm going to hang out with my family, I'm going to like visit some friends, and I kind of want to check out the sports science world in Toronto and see what exists in Canada. And so I did it, and I was really disappointed at what existed in Toronto. There was nothing.
But also excited because there's an opportunity.
100%. So 100%. That's what it was. It was just like, so and I can still remember it clear as day. Like I was at BMO Field watching TFC with my two closest friends. And they kind of just looked at me and said, like, you what's going on? You got something on your mind? I said, I'm opening it up here. It's time. Because I was just watching like a lot of the athleticism going on, and just like I think it's time that Canada's, especially when it comes to this, a lot of the universities have the systems, but it's not open to the public. It's not open to private teams. So the access level isn't there. So on the private scale, you can just do so much more. So I just thought it would be a good idea to kind of come back home. And plus, Toronto's home, and I love the city, so it was a good time to move and just kind of establish it here. No,
for sure. It's and since then you've acquired quite a lot of clients. So can you tell who do you work with? Like, what's your clientele like on a regular day? On a regular week?
Yeah, so I still do some therapy, and I think and then I do a lot of sports science, and we do a lot of training. So I developed a good team, and I think if you would have asked me about 5 years ago, the performance lab has morphed a bit. Like initially I started, and it was very much completely a rehab center, and it kind of wasn't. I kind of woke up one day and it wasn't the vision. This wasn't the vision, although we were successful and we were busy, but I was just a therapist, and that's not the goal. That's not why I moved back. So it was like a pivot. It was just like, okay, like I'm going to switch this up, and I'm going to, lose people. But this wasn't the vision of the lab. Like I didn't move to Toronto to just basically be a therapist. So it was just like, all right, let's shift. So once we start to move into the world of sports science, we kind of went all in. So a lot of our clients, I would say our base clients, tend to be a lot of young athletes. They're working towards like getting a scholarship in the US. I would say that's a good portion of it. Then we have a lot of NCAA athletes and a lot of athletes who are trying to make that jump. So whether it be like this summer, this past year, we've had a couple kids, I call them kids, but they're probably in their 20s, trying to get to like a major league contract. So kids like that. And then we work with TC, who have one pro team under us, and then we work with a good handful of like just pro athletes who will kind of come in, spend some time with us, and then leave. So we're kind of all over the map. But in terms of sports, we're really all over the map.
And because it doesn't really matter, right, for you in terms of what to analyze. Like you can pick up the data from any sport, like that comes to you, like an athlete from rowing or an athlete
100%.
from, so you can recreate that environment in your lab. You can analyze the movement, and you can say, hey, this is how you can do it better.
So it's really interesting because when we start a project with say Tennis Canada, it was really interesting because I hadn't worked a lot with tennis, so we kind of have a system when we start a new sport. And the system is well, the first thing we do is we take up and we look at any research article that's ever been published. So then we sit as a group, as a collective within the lab, and we kind of go over it and deem what we consider to be necessary, what we consider to be valuable, not valuable, and then we kind of start morphing it. And then we run a lot of internal tests. So we start looking at things that we think are things that we're going to need and want. And then we start working with the technical guys and technical coaches and trying to extract information on what they want to see and how. And then to us, it's a great relationship. So when we're working with pro hockey team, we have a lot of involvement with the coaches to kind of say, hey, look, like we want to see. We want you guys to kind of, because we don't understand the technical, nor do we ever like make comments on it. So like when we were working together, you heard me say a lot of look, like I understand this is what we see on the technical side. On the kinematic side, no, that's when we kind of make our points and say, hey, look, like this is what's going on. So we do a lot of internal testing, and then our goal is to kind of recreate the motion as best as possible. For tennis, we like to be on court. So we set up on court, and so that way the athlete feels most comfortable in their own environment. When we had like hockey guys come in, we initially started inside our lab. So it's like 2,500 square feet. Yeah. We had it completely like iced out with fake ice.
No way.
And we did internal testing and realized that the actual data didn't compare to when we were on the ice. So we took the same people, tested them on ice, tested them on the fake ice, and then we're just like, the data is not valid enough. And so for us, that criteria needs to be really, really high. Yeah. And if we don't think that the data is good, then we don't use it, or we want to retake it. But we'll try to go anywhere we can, so that to best suit the athlete. Whether it's the only thing we can't do is underwater, because the reflection of the water. Yeah. Other than that, we've done equestrian. We've done baseball. We've done running sports. So we can pretty much do it all. But yeah, and sometimes just to add one more point, what a lot of it is too is a lot of athletes see us as a competitive advantage. So we can't say who a lot of times, like you don't see me mention specific names. A lot of times we can't. Yeah. And so there's been individual players who said, like, we don't want our names released just because they see it as a like competitive advantage.
I mean, exactly. You don't want your competitor to know that, oh, he's used that's why his results are going up, so I'm gonna start using this. Exactly. Yeah. It makes sense. You mentioned equestrians.
Yeah.
What? Like, who do you analyze? Like,
how, we got approached to do a rider.
A rider.
Yeah, to do a dressage rider.
And what did you pick up? I mean, if that's not it secret, like what did you pick up? Like what did you? Because I'm just trying to wrap it up around my head.
It was really funny. So we got approached, and our answer is always, sure, yeah, let's do it. And so then the client left, and then we kind of looked at each other and thought, what the F did we just, okay.
Yeah, you can swear here.
All right, cool. So it was just like, all right, let's figure this out. So there's actually a biomechanics course for horses themselves, but we wanted the information on the actual like human side of it. So so we went out, and captured the person, and it was more on posture. They wanted to see the posture they were to kind of on the horse, then how it relates on the jumps, and then certain movements of how the relationship was from the human to the horse. And then so it was interesting. I was actually, I wasn't on site for the capture, which was too bad. Yeah. But yeah, the other people on my team did it, and it was awesome. I saw the footage, and it was cool. We got some pretty good. The client was happy, and she improved, so it was good.
That's nice. What's the most fascinating story when it comes to these little findings? Like I think
you
have a lot.
I think there's two. One specifically comes to mind because it's so fresh. We had a kid who was third year university, and he had developed a significant injury and to a shoulder, and he had gone to the top 2 surgeons in North America.
What sport?
Baseball, sorry. Okay. Yes, he was a baseball pitcher, and he had gone to top 2 surgeons who basically said, we can't help you. And we talked to the team, and the team was basically like, well, we don't know what to do with this kid. If you want him, he's yours. And so we started to work with this kid, and we said, all right, look, we're gonna work you, and we're gonna test you. We're gonna figure out what's going on, and then you just got to give us carte blanche. So whatever we say to do, you're gonna do. And this kid did it, and he wasn't able to throw. He was throwing at about 91 miles an hour at that time, and he wasn't able to throw consistently, but just because he would throw and his arm would hurt. And so it was difficult. And so when we got the wraps under him, and when we started to work with him, and a year passes, now he's in his actually, sorry, second year. He was in his third year. So so we started to work with him, and then third year he goes back to school and he pitches, which is 3rd years and is the time to get drafted in MLB. Okay. And all of a sudden, you know, we get hey man, how's it going? And he's like, man, I feel great. My shoulder doesn't hurt. I'm like, you sure? Yeah. Okay, stick to the plan. We're gonna send you. So in the summertime, we had him, and he would drive like 3 to 4 hours a day to get here to the lab, and we would work him. And then every 4 weeks, he'd get tested on 3D. Every couple weeks, he was getting tested on force plates. We would check him all the time. And then by the end of the summer, we sent him off, and except he was doing our programs while he was at school. All the coaching staff was on board. They were very supportive. And all of a sudden, this kid starts blowing up. 91 went to 97. Wow. And then he was pitching, you know, full games without any issues. And his shoulder didn't bother him once.
So what was the issue?
Yeah, so what we found was
technical, or
there was something that it was just something that was an inefficiency we found that we saw that was more of a lower body inefficiency that once we cleared up was related to his shoulder and was able to kind of protect his shoulder and kind of like ward off.
So he was compensating? Is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah, so it ended up causing a lot of issues in the shoulder, and yeah, so he got drafted this year.
No way.
Yeah, so he got drafted, which was good on him. So we were really excited for him.
Yeah.
So that was fun. So I think that was because I think he was a young kid, and everybody like was just like at a loss for what to do with him, and the frustration level. So I think from a group standpoint, I think the team would say that's been lately are a good case for us. And then
of course, and makes you so proud. I mean, that's the reason why you started this whole thing, because to improve the athlete's life, to improve their careers, and to bring them to the next level. And that's why that science is, you know, it's like
the pros are fun.
Yeah,
the pros are fun. Like we've done a lot of work with pros, and we've done a lot of work with in the hockey world, and in kind of like some random sports like skiing and all the rest of it, in baseball. So all of it's, and obviously tennis, and now we're working with TC, working with some of the athletes in terms of the TC athletes, and seeing some of the successes we've had there, and it's been fun. I think for us, as long as the case is pretty cool, we've seen some good success. It's good.
How do you like working with tennis? And also, what do you notice, like coming, like you said, you didn't have a lot of like athletes from tennis, and now you have a bunch, like they just keep coming. So what do you notice are the patterns of maybe injuries, or the patterns of just biomechanics in general, potential red flags? Like what do you see? Just what gets
I think tennis has some similarities to other rotational sports. I think the culture of tennis is very different. I think that's what I'm getting used to more, or need to get used to more. I think the fact that it's an individual sport, I think is a little bit different, as opposed to kind of like a rotational team sport. So I think that's one of the challenges that I'm starting to get used to. I think the culture of tennis is a little bit different, just in terms of the amount of load and the amount of like volume tennis athletes kind of put themselves through.
It's more than like other sports.
It's significant. It's significant, and especially when you're talking at the junior levels and tennis parents, and I think because then you get a kind of another world in terms of just like the layers of like the academies, and then all of a sudden the parents at home, and there's a little bit more going on. So I think that's been an interesting ability to kind of like manage load on a lot of the athletes.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're in a team sport, you know, you're not gonna see, well, sometimes, but you're not gonna see like parents going on the ice with their kid to drop the pucks for them, and to, you know, like where in tennis you go in any public court, you just you become a coach when you're with the basket, right? So it's like it's a little bit different from that standpoint.
It's different, and then the overhead motion of a serve, and then the constant like service motion, it's a little bit more. I think you could kind of relate that to like a kind of a pitcher in terms of just like, but in pitching you tend to have pitch counts. And tennis, there's no counts. So I think little things like that. And there's more, I think, emphasis when it comes to like pitching, and in terms of just like the protection of the arm and all that stuff. It's very well known, I think, in the media and stuff like that. In tennis, not so much.
So can you elaborate on that? What can we do better?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see that like serving is typically done at the end of a end of session, which I find is really interesting. So you tend to take one of the hardest or technical motions and one of the things that's hardest on the shoulder, and it ends up being at the end of things like that, and which I find interesting. And then also just like measuring like capacity and volume, which is really, really hard to do. But just something I think that the sport needs to work on, and then also like just us as like sports science people to try to figure out like what the best. We sat down with TC and trying to figure, what's the best avenue to measure load, and the answer is there's no perfect way. Like all the tech that exists now is just it's either impractical or it's imperfect. And I think what we try to do is try to create the best answer, the best solution for the time being, and something that's a little bit more consistent. So in terms of just like what the similarities and differences are, a lot of similarities in terms of the rotational aspects. Rotational sport is for the most part consistent. Ground contact's most important, and then force is produced through the ground, and then it's just physics. You contact in or energy in, same energy that comes from the ground into you. So you produce most of the power through the legs, and then transfer that force through the torso, and then basically try to get it as much as you can to create a bit of a whip effect and get it through the hand to the racket. And so I think some things in terms of like the timing aspects tend to be fairly consistent. Certain things that are a little bit different tend to be, I would say that the actual like energy systems of the sport are a little bit unique. As opposed to like more of a baseball or hockey. I think the energy systems are a little bit different. That's right. And I think it's just some of the actual like the technical component of it, and the relationship between coach and athlete, and then is a little bit more unique because of the individuality of the sport. I think it's a little bit different, and trying to make sure that many times it's a very coach-driven sport. So there's a little bit of a difference between a coach-driven sport and a sport where there's a little bit more continuity with training. So, and because the scheduling is so crazy in tennis, there's no time off. So you're just you're always juggling. It's a very reactionary sport, as opposed to like, here's your off season, you have 2 months, go to work.
Yeah, that's right.
And here tennis is just like, better. It's like what, 2 weeks of an off season? You're all over the place, and you're traveling. And
exactly. No, it's tough to manage load, and it's tough to stay healthy, which I think it should become a priority for everybody moving forward, because there is so much information out there. It's, you have to, the problem is, like you mentioned, there's a lot of independence that goes into the sport, and especially coaches and parents, they feel like we need to do more. We want to do more as coaches because we want the kid to progress faster. We're not patient enough. The parents, same thing. It's natural that we want results faster. So that's sometimes when injuries come into play. And it's interesting you mentioned the serve. How do other sports, like the throwing motions, they practice it in the beginning, or like the pitchers, and like how does that work?
I think with pitching, because the only thing they do is pitch. So it's a little different. So they'll like do a bullpen, and they'll just kind of like focus on the pitching technique. But one of the first things I always remember was when I saw I was in Montreal, and I was at the NTC up there and watching practices, and a bunch of kids were at the end of the practice, they would just start to serve ball after ball. And the first thing that popped in my head was why is it done at the end? And everyone's just like, oh, that's just because that's the way it's always done. And to me, that's always like I never like that answer. Is that's because it's always done, because you get a lot, and I'm not hoping I don't sound like I'm picking on tennis.
No.
Because there's a lot in hockey, baseball. It's just like there's a lot of just like old school thought, and to me, I think as a collective, we should be always asking the question, why? Why are we doing it this way? Is there a better way to do things? And let's challenge the system, because I think the only way we kind of grow is if we continuously challenge the system and see what we can do better. And and that's what I think what we try to do in every sport is challenge the system a little bit. And sometimes it gets met with a little bit of resistance. But the one question the one answer I never like is because that's the way my coach did it, or that's the way it's always been done. Because to me, it's a cop out. And it's like, tell me why, and give me a good answer. And if it's because at this time and they're warmer or whatever the heck it is, then great. But I tend to lose confidence when the answer is because this is the way it's typically done.
Yeah, no, for sure. So how to manage that load? Because I know the statistic that normally on a junior 3-set level, like high level junior 3-set, on average you serve between 90 to 120 serves, something around that range. So sometimes, I mean, it doesn't make sense serving more than that per session, because, you know, again, it's good for somebody who's hearing this, who's listening to this back at home. So how do you manage the load other than the number? Like, how do you, like, what are the cues maybe? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's got to be, I think the hardest thing about tennis is trying to measure it as a whole. Because I think, like I had a junior today who I was seeing. Okay. And coming off a bit of an injury, and you know, we're managing load for them. And I said, okay, you know, you increase load at a little bit at a time. You try to handle capacity, and then once you can handle that capacity, you increase, and you kind of stair step it. And I said, yeah, okay, well, that's the number I'm doing. I was doing it for 3 hours. And I said, well, wait a minute, 3 hours total? I said, yeah, 3 hours total. Okay. But then I practice in the afternoon. like, well, hold on a second. But that doesn't count. Like, well, yeah, it counts. Of course it counts. Yeah. So I think being able to manage, like having a good idea of the total load, and I think what's challenging also is the intensity of the load, and then trying to combine the two to kind of get a sense of the overall like actual impact on the body. I think it's one of the most difficult things to do. Yeah. And I think a lot of it we have to figure out in terms of just like the age of the athlete, the efficiency of the athlete, and then also just like the capacity of the athlete. Is the athlete, some athletes can handle a little bit more capacity, and because all the other challenges is you don't necessarily want to underload them throughout the year. So it's about keeping them at a consistent capability, so that, because if they go underloaded too much and then they go, a lot of times injuries happen in that portion where they kind of dip and go back. So it's one of the most challenging things that doesn't have, I would say, a clean answer.
So it's still based on the feel. It's still like you have to feel the athlete. How do they feel? Like, how do they respond to certain exercises that you're doing? How fast is their reaction? That based compared to their regular like all these little cues. That is that what it is?
Yeah, I think there's a good. I think tennis should have a good balance of like the feel. Yeah. And also like the technical, so you can use like the responses of the athlete and kind of manage their, you know, their responses in terms of how they feel, how they slept, how many hours, and just kind of do some of those apps which are kind of like pretty prevalent on the market.
That's the stuff they're doing at Tennis Canada. They have the like the system where you like put in the athlete puts in the information, and like the answers that you were saying, like how did you sleep, how was the workout, how are you feeling, all that kind of stuff.
I think with that is, so it's funny because I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who runs the therapy side on the Galaxy, and on that specific conversation. And it's interesting. I think with all the tech stuff, it's really about the trends that you look for, because you tend to have three types of athletes who kind of answer those questions. The athlete who is actually completely truthful and says, you know, like, I slept 4 hours. I had a shitty night's sleep. Then you have the athlete who's concerned about what their coach is going to think. They're a pleaser. And so they just want to be like, oh shit, if I say they're going to, you know, if I tell Bogdan I slept 4 hours, they're going to get on my case, right? And all that stuff, so I slept for 8 hours. And then you also have the athletes who are a little bit worried on the pro level about like contracts, and, you know, they don't want anybody knowing anything, so they're just not going to do it. So and then also it's very time dependent. So in the sense that, you know, if I don't do it right after, and I try to like do them back in, so like done shit, like I haven't done them in a week, and Bogdan's gonna get pissed at me, so let me just do it. And like Friday, I slept about 3 hours, and it's not that accurate. And then also the cueing of the questions is important. So I think what we notice in terms of all of it, and even just like even monitoring devices, is because the monitoring devices for load are very imperfect. So Biomechanics, who works with me, a lot of her research, and we've done internally and externally, is a lot on accelerometers and all that. And what we notice a lot is that there's a lot of it's not the cleanest of data. But what we try to do is, as best we can, is be able to extract the best quality data that actually is applicable, and then to trend it. And it's in the trends that you can kind of start to get valuable information. So if you use the same data for over like months and months and months, then you can start to extract data and say like, hey, look, like the person who who's actually gives us the good information, all of a sudden they're something's going on because they're a little off. You can kind of see it. And then there's some gadgets that, you know, we're playing with internally that we're kind of like trying to scope out now at our facility. So before we kind of like implement the system, we tend to test it out at our place, whether it be like a nutritional supplement. Or, so we have one thing we're looking at now that we're just kind of putting through its paces, just to kind of see if it can give us a better read, and more of a reactionary thing, which is as opposed to the athlete having to come in and answer questions and give a perspective or an opinion. This will give us a little bit more quantifiable data, just to kind of be like, this is the measurement, and then move on. So yeah, it's challenging. In other sports you see it too. I mean, I think the best answer, because considering we're in Toronto, is the Kawhi Leonard approach, which is like load management became like such a significant term in Toronto over the past year. And you saw it like work to a T with the Raps, using sports science to kind of better create efficiency and allow Kawhi to play throughout the year. And then in the playoffs.
What's the next big thing in sports science? What's hot? Like in your mind? I mean,
I think I'm a little biased. I'm gonna say the 3Ds kind of like where I see it at. I think that if you look at testing, you know, the EPL's kind of like been, the English Premier League's been doing testing for a long time. And I remember having a couple of discussions back in like, I guess it was like 07, 08. And I was at a couple conferences out in Europe, and talking to a couple guys from like, I think they were from Man City, and I forget what other team, one of the teams in Holland. And they were describing to me
Ajax?
Like, I think so.
Okay.
And they were describing to me like how they use it from like the academies up. And to me, it just makes more sense. Like, so if you have an injured player, as opposed to letting them, how do you let them get onto the pitch or onto the court? Doctor has to go on and say like, oh yeah, they're fine. Not the best. Well, how about if we had like quantifiable data to say like, this is how hard they hit, this is how fast they ran, this is the joint angle that they were able to elicit before. And so that's how soccer's been doing it.
Okay. So
that's how the two guys I was talking with do it. And I think that in terms of like any other sport, you have baseline data on everybody and you can see progressions. So personally, I think like biasly, I think that, and if you look at like the NBA is moving that route. So my old work actually does a lot of combine testing for the NBA. So then when the NBA does their combine, they actually do the main combine, but also then all the athletes go into separate quarters and they do a bunch of 3D testing and force play testing, just to kind of get more quantifiable data. So I think it's going to be in that data analysis to kind of be able to where I think sports science is going. And I think right now load management is kind of like the buzzword for sure. And I think that's kind of it. I think give it another year or two, I think you're starting to see the 3D stuff and start to take pretty big effect. Force plates has kind of been using it. I think right now it's being underutilized. And I think right now, I think you and I were like 5 minutes before we got on the air, we're talking about creativity.
Yeah.
And I think right now, when people hear the word sports science, they think of like a personal lab. And I think to me, the best people I've ever met in the field have this huge creative approach. And they start thinking outside the box. They understand the box. And I think this is the model we try to use at our place, which is you understand the box, you know the rules. And once you know the rules, then you can start to break them. But you have a creative approach to think of like, what other way can I do this? What other way can I solve this puzzle? If I'm like doing a Rubik's Cube, do I just kind of do it? Or like maybe I try to do a fun way around it. And I think that's kind of where the next level is. And I think people who've been using force plates for just recently are really like thinking about it in a linear, like, you know, A, B, it's in the box. And I think the people who use it well think outside the box. And I think it's the same thing with all the other sports science approach. I think there's a bit of a creative approach to it. I think the people that push the boundaries a little and can kind of like take a little bit more advantage of it.
Yeah, no, that personally fascinates me a lot. I remember when, as part of Coach 4, we went to one of the hockey teams' practice.
Yeah.
We got very lucky, very fortunate to observe the hockey practice, and the level was just below NHL, so the reserve team of the NHL team, and the coach told us that basically, listen, we measure the intensity of the training, but individually by every single player.
Yeah.
So it not only it's a little bit different, but that's where I'm going with. Can you measure something else with what you do, or is it solely based on improving performance, or you know what I mean, performance, or and preventing injury? Because he was saying, well, this guy today was like at 11.5, but all the other weeks is like 12.4. So what's going on? So I don't know how they measure. There's like a company, I think, that does that. Yeah, there was like a specific software. I don't know what's the deal there, but I was impressed by that, because like, how do you measure that, you know? Yeah,
there's a bunch of tech and stuff like that, and with hockey, a lot of like GPS units are used, and trying to like then quantify it a little bit easier. I think the name of the game in terms of just like the next little bit is going to be that individuality you were talking about. So you and I aren't the same person. Our body types aren't the same. We're going to have different things that we gravitate towards. And if you put me towards like Milos, right, completely different body types, you know, should we train the same? And then this is where like kind of the individuality of sport comes in, and I think this plays a lot in both into the junior side and into the pro side. So I think the testing, whether it be like our testing or whether it be some other testing, the more specific you can get with an athlete to say, hey, look, your quad reactivity speed isn't the same, and person B, your extension reactivity isn't the same. But a lot of times what we see, especially in the lower levels, is that the kids are trained the same. So what ends up happening is you do a disservice to one, you do a service to the other.
So my question then is, because hopefully at some point a lot of parents of those kids will tune into the podcast and they will hear this, and I'm like, and they're maybe number 50 in the province, and they're like, hey, maybe we should do this thing. Like, how early do you think, in terms of age and in terms of the level, is appropriate to do this kind of stuff? So like, when is it like serious enough for the athlete to know, maybe I should give it a try?
Personally, like at my place, it's really individualistic. A person comes in, we have a sit down meeting with the kids and the parents to see, one, if the level's there. We're not meant for like house league and stuff like that.
Okay.
In terms of age, it's really dependent. We tend to with force plates young. We do force plate. We've done force plate testing on like 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds.
No way.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Is it valuable to do that at that age?
I'll give you. It's interesting. So Adriano was doing a camp, and so we went out to see Adriano's kids, and it was an under 10, under 12, or it was under 10, under 12. So we set up force plates, and we set up some reactivity drills, and set up just a bunch of tests for the kids, and made it fun, right? And so Adriano had half the group, and he did tennis.
Adriano is, for somebody who doesn't know, is a former, now current Denis Shapovalov's coach.
So he had the kids on the court, and we had the other group upstairs in the gym, and vice versa. And what we ended up doing was just some reactivity drills. And you'd be surprised, and because we've done it with his group, and then we've also done it with like like baseball kids and the rest of it. You'd be surprised on how they match up, because like after we like to confer with the coach and say, who'd you like? Who'd you think the best? And we'll be like, hey, we like ABC. I would say I'm guessing around this, but I would say 80% of the time we pick the same kids.
Nice. Because you didn't see what they did on the court, they didn't see how they perform in the gym.
100%. Yeah. When it comes to, like, if you look at, like, I mean, you can go the absolute extreme route. Like, you look at like countries like China and Russia that do quite a bit of extensive training when they're little kids. I think for us, we don't do necessarily 3D on like kids who are prepubescent. Not necessarily, unless they're exemplary, unless their level is quite high. So we will tend to do a lot of force plate stuff. We tend to do a lot of like just algorithm testing. So for us, we kind of take it in an individual case, very like forthright with the parents, and say, hey, look, like we think or we don't think that that Johnny's going to need 3D or anything like that. We do as little as possible or as little invasive stuff to kind of get it. Once they kind of hit.
Do you still have parents who are like, no, we want to do it, we'll pay more?
Yeah.
Or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah. And we try to like shut it down. So most parents are kind of pretty chill when we kind of like walk them through it. So normally for us, force plates we're doing, we kind of like to see it, unless they're like 4. You know what I mean? We don't get valuable data. But if they're kind of like 8, 10, we can actually pull a little bit.
Yeah.
And then for 3D, we like to kind of be a little bit older, just a little bit older, and at a very high level, for us to be able to get good data. And you'd be surprised. And for us, so at the Performance Lab, we train a lot of young athletes, and it's about the individuality of the athlete. And I think we try to respect the athlete in terms of just like his or her individuality. So group training's fine. But it has its limitations, and especially when we start to kind of jump up the ranks to kind of the more elite players, and then all of a sudden we get to kind of like the very elite players, or the people who make millions of dollars on TV. The more specific you can be with the athlete in terms of so we were working with the team, and we looked at it. I won't say too much because you'll figure out who the team is, but we looked at one thing that they do all the time. And we individually broke down the athletes who we targeted in terms of their strengths and weaknesses. And we said, okay, for player A, they need to do this to get better. For player B, they need to do B to get better. And as a collective, the players improved quite a bit. So it was a measure of about 11%. So which at that level is huge.
It's huge.
So what we try to do is be able to individualize the programming as best we can. And the people who argue the point of saying, hey, if the kids are too young, it doesn't really matter, they haven't hit puberty at some point, and all the rest of it. And to me, my answer to that is you don't want to necessarily, it depends on the age obviously, but if you see a blatant discrepancy, a blatant inefficiency, or even something that's gonna, because everybody's got is efficiency, you iron it out now, you clean up movement, and the cleaner the movement now, the cleaner you can get somebody to create contacts,
of course,
the better it is. You just now have a cleaner, I call it a canvas, you have a cleaner canvas to paint with.
That's right.
So
when an athlete gets that assessment by you guys, with all the 3D stuff, the force plating and all that stuff, what kind of program the person should expect? Like, what does it look like? Is it a fitness plan? Is it a injury prevention plan? Obviously it depends on what you guys find, but what does an athlete, I guess, leave your lab with? That's the question.
So once an athlete comes in, first step is we kind of sit down with them and just kind of talk like we are. I want to know their goals, flat out. And when the kid came up to me with the shoulder injury, he said, I want to be drafted. I got 1 year to be drafted. That's it. That's
kid that you were saying about the baseball player.
So we try to sit down the goals, and for tennis kids, we've heard, I want to be at this level by the age of 16, 17. Right? So for us, it's just, okay, so we have the goals in mind, and now we try to like develop a plan to be able to achieve that goal. So normally we test them, and then it depends on one of two things. It depends on if they're training in-house or out of house. So when I first started it, I ran into I made a lot of mistakes in business, but I think one of the biggest mistakes is I let everybody who had a fitness coach just say, okay, here's the data, here's what it is, and here's how I would do it. But the problem is, and if the buy-in isn't there, or if the coach quality isn't there, then it doesn't work. So now I'm very selective on who I'll share the data with. So if the person's in-house, it's really easy. They start training at the lab. They go through a full day of testing. They leave with just kind of like, hey, we're gonna convene in a week. You're gonna come back in, and we're gonna start to kind of develop a plan. So normally it takes us about 3 to 4 days to kind of like analyze all the data, kind of collective, sit down, and then create a needs analysis for the athlete. So once we have that down, if we know the athlete's training with us, we've already like at that first time have discussed what their schedule's like, their commitments, their school commitments, anything like that, or their, you know, if they're going to be in town, if it's a pro athlete, you know, how much access do we have to them? Yeah. Then once we have that, then we can kind of like game plan what we're doing. If it's in-house, it's easy. Everything's done in-house.
Yeah.
They don't have to think. They come in the door, everything at the lab's taken care of. That's the thing. Our motto, like, we don't want the athlete to have to think about anything. They come in, their nutrition's taken care of, pre-nutrition's taken care of, post-nutrition's taken care of. All they have to do is show up. That's kind of like the motto. That's kind of how I kind of like it. They just need to show up. If it's a pro athlete and they're away, then it's all based on, and we're comfortable with their proficiency level in the gym, then it's also fairly easy. If there's, we'll go through the movements in-house. Then they log into our website, and all their programming is there, and then we just kind of communicate via like the clouds, and they send us videos and kind of communicate, and they check in with us as much as they can when they're in town. If it's like a team, then it's easy too. A lot of times, like the teams like we've been working with, typically have some really good trainers, and so that's awesome. So it's really easy for us. We provide the reports, and then we'll sit down with them and kind of go through everything, and normally that works out really, really well. Where it kind of gets a little bit of a complicated is if somebody comes in and says, I have my own fitness trainer and I'd like to work with them. Normally we're totally cool about it. The only thing is we have to okay them. So we have to kind of see, one, if they're engaged and they're willing to do it, because we've had a couple instances where there was like a bit of a like, hey, look, man, we're not threatened. Like, we're not here to take over your athlete. Right. Like, we're just here.
We're not really fitness guys. We're just want to do the data.
100%.
Help your athlete. Let's work together.
Yeah. And then, and if the person's like totally gets it and on board, then that's fantastic. Then we typically will work with that fitness person and just trying to get them going. And then the other person we always try to get involved is always the technical side, because it's just as important, if not more important. So we always like the technical side, whether it's a tennis coach, whether it's a pitching coach, whether it's a skating coach, whatever the heck the sport is, whether it's an horse riding coach, to kind of get a sense of like what needs to be done on the technical side, and also the data can be very valuable on their side. Like we'll send the coach like the actual 3D modeling. So the coach says, can I look at it from like the bottom up? We're just like, yeah, absolutely. So they'll like flip the cameras, and it's like, so holy crap, like I've never seen their serve like from this angle, and I can see this, and it's just like, well, that's awesome. So like, tell me, because like it was really interesting for us. Like we were working at TC, and we were testing a bunch of players, and it was Andre Labelle, who's so he was we were testing Rebecca, and she's hitting, and Andre gives a cue. So I looked over at the biomechanist and said, record it as a 2, right? Record it as a separate issue. So we did, and so we actually measured pre and post cue, and then the differences between the cue and the improvements after the cue. Nice. So it's really interesting for us to kind of be able to kind of gauge it, because like at the end of the day, we're science geeks and sports geeks, and for us, we don't like to touch the technical. It's not our expertise. We let the experts do their thing, and but it's always intriguing to us to kind of like learn the technical and be able to appreciate it, because it helps us to then be able to better understand. Like when we were talking, when you guys came by, it was just like, hey, where is the best place to hit a ball? Like, so we like, where is it exactly, and how best to position? What is the angle?
Yeah, what's the difference between forehand and backhand? Does it different one-handed backhand, two-handed backhand? I remember that conversation. Yeah,
because us it's so interesting to kind of get that and to be able to kind of like store it in our kind of database, so that when we see it again, like we're understanding, and then also just like what's the technical side of the serve, and we understand it from a mechanical side. But like we were talking about before, within like there's an art to it and there's a science to it. And what we try to do with every athlete, and we always try to get pegged into a corner, which is just like, what's the optimum angle to for the shin to be, or what's the optimum angle? And it's just like, there really is no optimum angle as much as there is an optimal angle for the individual. Yeah. So we like to like relate it to the individual. Like, what's the proper or best angles for this person? So when we look at a tennis player, when we look at a pitcher, when we look at a hockey player, when we look at a rower, it's always in relation to the actual person themselves.
So how do you define like what's good for that person in terms of, for example, contact point? like how can you analyze that?
Oh, sorry, not for a contact point as much.
But like, for example, like for the, like, I don't know, the release of the ball, like that, because you were saying like it's individual and how. Like,
what we're trying to what we try to do is try to look at like the specific angles. So like if we're looking at a pitcher or at somebody skating, what we try to do is look at like what's the best knee angle for that person, what's the best shin angle for that person in relation to their low back angle, in relation to the thoracic spine angle, in relation to their shoulder angle.
Oh, okay, I know what you mean. Okay.
So like the best example is actually skating. So we were asked like what's the ideal angle for the skate to be at relative to the knee, so the shin angle. It's a really challenging question because for us it's just like, well, that question completely relies on the angle of the hip, which then completely relies on the angle of the back. So there's like 3 or 4 variables that need to be in. It's the same with tennis in terms of like, or golf is actually another great example, because you always like, you can watch somebody serve or watch somebody hit a forehand. You can watch somebody swing a golf club, and there's some funky golf swings, and there's some like differences in how to serve. But when we look at the back mechanics of it, the actual like timings, you'd be surprised at how similar or almost exact they are. And we've looked at a ton of golf. And like the kinematic sequencing of golf and the kinematic sequencing of a tennis serve and of a forehand, and you'd be surprised. And like, even though there's variation in terms of the style, there's certain things that happen, and there's those certain things happen. The timing
of those things that we just bang on
100%. Wow. And then everything around it is, so that's why like it's interesting to that. The question always becomes is, well, this person doesn't necessarily look like an athlete, but why are they so good? You know. And it's because their nervous system is so bloody good, and their timing is impeccable, and that is a little bit of a fudge factor. Yeah,
that brings a good point, that just from coaching standpoint, it's not about, because it's not about technique. I mean, it is, but we don't have to be so anal about technique necessarily all the time, because there's other things that are more important. I mean, technique in terms of biomechanics, but I'm just like in terms of your preparation of the swing. Yes, you want certain things, but at the same time, there are more important things that should be there, that we should be worried about.
Yeah, like it's interesting to see when coaches like teach like kids how to swing a golf club, and you have some kids who, I mean, there's certain things that are going to be the same, and then there's certain things that are going to be outside, and sometimes you're going to get a kid or a pro who swings completely outside the norm, and it's interesting when they try to correct it, and it messes them up. And sometimes that funkiness, as long as it meets the same criteria and has the same patterning, to me, there's nothing wrong with it.
And there's no like red flags for the injury.
100%. Yeah. As long as like there's no red flags, and like the from a technical side, it's effective, and the timing is correct, and it's productive, and they're actually like successful with it. I don't necessarily think that you go with something to break with what's not broken.
Yeah. Well, it's like in tennis. I remember a lot of coaches who I worked with, who were mentoring me. They were saying, always look at the ball. Yeah, is the ball doing what you want? Then maybe then look, okay, right, maybe there's something there that really like potentially injury wise, maybe it can look better, right? But look at the ball. Yep. Does it achieve what you want? And then try to interfere.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because there's now like some new tech that not out yet. We're trying to like figure it out, but like for baseball and golf, the spin rate of the ball, and now they're actually doing that with tennis in terms of like looking at the ball, like what the ball looks like after it gets hit. Okay. And then how it relates, and that's really cool. I was actually thinking.
So that's the new thing. Like that's one of those things that wow, that's fascinating. So for people who are listening, and just in general, like, is your lab available for like anybody off the street? I mean, the street. I mean, it's not, you're not locked in to work with certain teams, and it's just any athlete who thinks they're at that level that you can help them. They can come in and get an assessment, get a consultation, and at least
for sure. I mean, we've done some pretty fun projects. So anybody, it's open to anybody. We don't say no. Okay. We do some fun projects when it comes to rehab too. So we still run a therapy center out of there, which is fun. So sometimes if like complicated injuries, we'll do 3D on them too.
Have you had any crazy requests now that I'm thinking about it? Like any, like other than the equestrians? Like to me, that's like interesting. But
one of the best projects which didn't happen, which I was disappointed in, was a ballet project.
No way.
To me, that would have been that would have been super cool. Mm-hmm. We had a director come in, and it would have been really fascinating to do like 2 people, and to me that, and to like use it more in like a choreography. Like I'm like you, like I like the arts are like a passion, and you know, I'd be doing something very artistic if I wasn't doing this. Mm-hmm. Maybe tattoo.
Yeah, who knows?
I think that was one of the projects that never came about that was most intriguing to me. We've done some really fun projects too, or like some really intriguing projects in terms of just like some really